News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM. This is KFYO Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. It is 7:36 a.m. and the weatherman is telling us it's about 60 degrees outside and that we're forecasting a high today of 61. So we don't have very far to go, that's for sure. Well, as promised, in-house is Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. Good morning, Sheriff Rowe.
Hey, guys. How are y'all this morning?
Well, we're pretty good. You caught us in an unusual moment when Matt and I when we disagree about, and we're talking about building the border wall. And little did we know that you have kind of eyes on the border wall down there, and you showed us some pictures that you took. And so you spent some time down there and have seen firsthand what is going on our southern border.
Oh, absolutely. And it's sad that it's not covered as well as it should be, particularly in the national media. Again, this trip was, it's been a little over a year ago now. We went down, took about 3 days. The DPS, our regional commander here, invited myself, the police chief, down, and we got a full tour. We saw everything from the air, from water, all of the different assets they had poured in down there at that time. Of course, this was at the peak of the Department of Public Safety's deployments down there. But again, it was just absolutely amazing to see what was going on, and really, really eye-opening. And I was, like I said, I was listening to you guys talking about the wall going in and some of those types of things, and there's segments of it down there. You can see it. That picture you referred to, I've often joked about, that's kind of an obvious snapshot of what not to do with a wall when you've got just a giant gap right in the middle of it.
Right.
And it's like, well, they won't see that. They won't come through. But, the simple fact of the matter is there was a lot of takeaways to have from that trip. First and foremost was the number of for sale signs, that where at one time, these were probably great summer vacation homes, and they're just vacant now, and they can't sell them. They can't clear, get clear of them because, like I said, if they even lock the doors, these folks that are crossing over will break into them. If they can find dry clothing, they'll steal that. They'll get into any food stores, anything like that they can do. When you talk about it from the narcotic side of things, they use those same houses. They'll get, where they can get whatever they're bringing across. Typically, marijuana is a high quantity thing that's brought across down there. You're literally talking in the hundreds of thousands of pounds per year. That just one sector. Now, keep this in mind too. What I am referring to is just the McAllen, sector of the Border Patrol. So we're only talking one. It's the busiest, but is just one sector. So I'm not talking, Brownsville to San Diego here. We're just talking down South Texas. And they'll take that load and bring it into a vacant location, stage it there for then the mules to grab it on the U.S. side and move it to wherever they're going to move it to distribute it. So again, it was really something to see down there. In fact, when we were up in one of the aircraft at one point, literally did one of the things you don't hear them talk about a lot is they'll talk about apprehensions, but they don't talk about turnbacks. So if they're intercepting, at that time we were down there, it was at a peak time, so they were getting about 6,500 a week that they were apprehending coming across. That didn't include another 500 what they referred to as turnbacks, which is, somebody is making an active attempt to cross, and because either, aircraft or ground units or whatever come up close enough for them to be seen, and they'll turn around and
65. They were apprehending 6,500 a week?
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, it was.
What do you do with 6,500 people?
Well, I asked those very questions, and there was a lot of interesting dynamics I had never even thought about. And one of the most striking things out of that number was that 52%, so greater than half of the number that they intercept are what are classified OTM, other than Mexican. They've got, they'll tell you that, and this is individuals coming in from 128 different countries from around the world. And anybody will tell you Mexico is absolutely the easiest country in the world to enter into by either land, sea, or air. And so that's where if you want to get to the U.S., get to Mexico and then come up through. Now, when I asked that question, what do you do with them? With the adult Mexican nationals, they would immediately take them and to a point of entry and hand them back over to a counterpart, Mexican counterpart on the opposite side. The kids, They would not turn the kids back, so they and I understood there was a lot of struggles trying to figure out what to do with all these kids because they wouldn't return them back. So they had every church camp and everything else they could possibly grab up.
They have to bring their mother, at least their mother, along with the kids, didn't they?
Well, not necessarily. Well, you have to keep in mind you had one summer where there was one major news story about just the unattended children that were coming across. In fact, the day we left down there, we were sitting in the aircraft and we had pulled off on the apron while the pilot was adjusting his flight plan up. So we're still listening. We've got we're listening to the ground radios, and they were in the process just before we lifted off the ground of apprehending 19 unattended kids that day, or unaccompanied kids, excuse me, let me rephrase that, just that particular morning. So no, they're not necessarily always with parents, and you get a wide array. A lot of them are coming over. As soon as they see Border Patrol, they'll throw their hands up and go, hey, I'm here, I'm ready for my government benefits I was promised or told, those types of things too. You've got the ones that are actively muling, the narcotics and that type of stuff, and it's interesting to watch, photographs and stuff. They have a program down there that is a covert camera system of sorts. I don't want to get too far off into it. I don't know how much of that's really protected information. I know they did a big statewide press conference on it, but it's interesting to watch because what you would see is the people and drugs moving north, and typically they'd have almost as many pictures of people moving back south carrying guns. Gun cases and everything else, toting those back south. So,
good information, Sheriff. We'll take a quick break and be back with more in just a moment with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. And we're back here at 7:47 a.m. Very interesting conversation this morning with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. Good morning again.
It's good to be here. I do want to make one thing. I did overstate. I was going through numbers in my head as you asked me that question. I said 6,500 per week. The number's actually 2,500 per week. Because I had followed up and asked a question while I was down there. I said, so, because I get the questions here locally, people see Facebook and everything, and will see some Middle Eastern, form of currency, supposedly, snapshotted on a rancher's land down in South Texas, and so, and when you know that you've got that percentage coming in from that many different countries, I said, how many of those folks should trigger some form of a referral, for follow-up from, say, a joint terrorism task force or something like that? And without missing a beat, the answer was easy. It was 10%. So I'm doing the math in my head, and that's what reminded me that I'd made that number a little higher than I should have. But, I'm thinking 2,500 per week is what you're intercepting, and that's, 10% of that's 250. I said, gosh, is there enough people down here to do those? And, of course, you get, unfortunately, that now there's just no way. It's all a matter of prioritization. But, the vast majority, unfortunately, of the adults OTMs, they would tell us in the actual field stations that they would load them up, ship them to Harlingen, and if beds were available, they would keep them. But most of them were given the, here's your 90-day notice return for an immigration hearing, and then they'd be cut loose.
I guess my trouble that I have with building the wall, it seems to me like that the way to end this illegal immigration is close the buffet on this side of the border.
Absolutely.
As long as the buffet is open, they'll find a way over the wall because the rewards are just too great.
Exactly, and I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, again, not trying to be rude, lack of a better term, but again, when you're talking in the vernacular of the Border Patrol, in South Texas and probably anywhere along that southern border, and they're talking about, the apprehensions and interceptions of these folks, they say a lot of them, are family units, and the moment they see a Border Patrol agent, their hands are up. And
and I don't blame them. I would, if I were them, I'd do the same thing, I think, if my family were.
Again, you have to, and Matt was asking a question during the break there about, should we work more with the Mexican government? I think you maximize what you can do, but I think you also have to be very, very realistic that, as it stands right now, there's 32 states in the country of Mexico. Of those 32, 19 of them are not under government control. And I mean, that's
32 states, what?
32 states in the country of Mexico.
In the country of Mexico.
Right,
okay.
And 19 of those are not under government control. Again, stuff that I don't know why it seems so difficult. I know that our federal partners and whatnot that work down, across the border and partner with Mexican authorities and whatnot know this stuff. I know they're reporting it up their chain of command, but where it seems to stall, at the national level, which I find really reprehensible in a lot of ways. That we don't. You can't ever fix a problem if you don't acknowledge what and where all the problems are at,
what the reality is,
and exactly. And again, it gets I think lost in the political conversations of trade and all these types of things, which is great. But the reality is, when we're trying to prevent, and I'm talking about us here at the local level in Lubbock, Texas, trying to prevent the astronomical amounts of narcotics, and
Yes.
everything that comes with that, coming into our communities and poisoning our kids and stringing them out and taxing every system, our hospitals and all those types of things to their absolute limits. I'd like to see some resolve at some, outside of the realm that I can control.
And you've just led us right into one of the big questions that I wanted to ask you, and that is, of course, when you were here last time, one of the things that we talked about was what seemed like a large increase in the amount of shootings. Now, it seemed as though back then, and that's been nearly 8 or 9 months ago that you were here, right. And it seemed like every day when we would come on this show, there would be a story about a shooting. And then sometimes there were 2 shootings at 2 different locations. And I was thinking yesterday, well, we're going to have the sheriff on tomorrow, and we're going to ask him about the violence in Lubbock and the shootings, of course. And I was thinking, gosh, I can't remember. It's been a while since I've heard of a shooting in Lubbock. And lo and behold, this morning, last night at 10 o'clock, there was a shooting in Lubbock.
Right.
I guess the question is, drugs coming across our southern border is by and large what is causing all this violence that we are seeing in Lubbock,
Absolutely.
Particularly the shootings. They're drug-related.
Absolutely. And I use the analogy a lot of times of home invasions and those types of things because that sounds so dramatic and dynamic, and nobody, likes to think about it. They're sitting at home watching Wheel of Fortune and their front door get kicked in and be held at gunpoint while somebody robs them. But those are the rarity. When you hear the news reports of, the standard, what we would consider kind of standard, and I use that term loosely, home invasion, it's individuals that know each other. And drugs are, going to be involved in that.
Somebody, money is owed.
Money's owed. Somebody stole somebody's products, whatever the case might be. And then when you look at the ever-increasing numbers of gangs that gang members that we're coming in contact with and documenting on a daily and regular basis. I looked at just the statistics of one operation here just a couple of weeks ago. One 10-hour operation where we just maximized personnel and went out and hit some of the hot spots around the city. And that particular group, just on that particular day, and I'll bring up the numbers during the next break and show them to you, but just on documenting gang members, if memory serves, it was 44 new ones documented in 10 hours and 4 re-documented, that are reaffirmed. So again, it's something that is really rocking along.
Yeah. Okay. Quick break, and we'll be right back with more of Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. 7:57 a.m. and we are again visiting with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. Got so much to talk about. Have a list of things we wanted to talk about, and we've kind of gotten caught up on what's going on with the violence in Lubbock and the wall and the drugs coming across our southern border. That's probably the biggest. Well, no, probably it is the biggest reason for the violence that we're seeing here in Lubbock, the shootings.
Absolutely. Yeah, you tie every, I go back to kind of and not trying to be too much of a numbers guy or statistical guy, but, one simple thing I can put out there is this. We have a 1,512-bed detention center here in Lubbock, and today's population just exceeded 1,200 again. I looked at the count this morning. Of that population, 1,200 inmates, 70% of those that are in there because they're addicted to something or tied to drugs in somehow or another. And I mean, that's just as easy a number as I can put out there. And like I said, a lot of times it's not that they're in necessarily for the delivery or the manufacture or the possession. They're in there for the burglary, the robbery, or the theft they did to support the habit. I mean, it's just that, again, it's the best example I can give you as to just how prolific it is and has been going since 2014. It just because that's when we really started noticing it going crazy.
2014.
2014. It was.
What happened in 2014?
I don't know that we can specifically pinpoint it, but I think you have to look at some national policy at that point. I think you have to look at, okay, here's the point that border security starts to become somewhat questionable in terms of directives down through those agencies. And you've got the cartels taking advantage of it, and they're pushing as much quantity as they possibly can across while they thought they could.
And it seems like that all roads lead to Lubbock.
And there's a lot of them.
Okay, we're going to hold you over because we still have other things to talk about that we haven't even touched on yet. So we'll be back after this 8 o'clock break with more of Sheriff Rowe. We are broadcasting live from the Thacker Jewelry Studios. View the custom collection at 6120 82nd Street in Lubbock. And we're back this morning with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe. It's been a very interesting conversation. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about and didn't get to the first half hour is the race for Lubbock County Judge. Of course, it comes down now to Gary Bourne and the other guy, Curtis Parrish. And Curtis is two very different styles of individuals, and I know both of them very well, and I think you do too. And I know there's probably only so much you can say, but one of the things that when we had them on the show, one of the big things they do is the work on the Lubbock County's budget, which includes your budget.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I was very interested in, particularly because of what I am personally seeing and feeling about the Lubbock crime rate, is that your department, the sheriff's department, is funded, and both. And I would have to say, and agree or disagree with me, Matt, that maybe Gary Bourne was more outspoken about funding.
Maybe, but I mean, they both were very outspoken of making sure that the sheriff's department got what they needed, and
to me, that's first and foremost.
So right now, with what you have right now, is the sheriff's department getting what they need?
Well, I in a lot of ways, yes. But the one of the big issues with the sheriff's office is we've been in a perpetual state of catch up. And I look at it. When I first took office in 2009, we had 13 patrolmen. That was it for full 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365-day coverage. And we've been slowly, and incrementally being able to bring those numbers up. And in other divisions, such as our criminal investigative division, because you put more patrolmen out, you've got to have more investigators prepared to follow up on the reports the patrol will generate. Obviously, we spent the first part of the show talking about narcotics. That's been one of the areas that's really, expanded and had to expand, overnight quite a bit. So again, it's one of those things that each budget cycle is a challenge. Again, the sheriff's office budget in and of itself is the largest within the county. So again, having an opportunity to have visited, at length and on multiple different occasions with both the two candidates, again, it's something I want them, to keep in their forefront, that it is important to make sure we've got the tools we need and the personnel, and we can retain the good personnel, which is probably our one of our primary focuses. Is making sure we stay competitive and we can keep people here and we're not in a perpetual state of attrition and retraining and all those types of things. These skill sets don't come overnight, and I don't care which application you're looking at them in. So again, it's just one of those things that we've got an important job to do out there, and we certainly want to make sure that when it comes budget time, we understand. Look, we're not shooting for the stars here. We work in the sheriff's office, and since I've taken office, we work in 5-year increments. We plan in 5-year strategic plans, and we've come close a lot of those times. We've worked through those. We've gotten a lot of things achieved. I don't want to say that we haven't by any stretch, but again, it's something we've got to perpetually look at. You're never going to hit a plateau, because Lubbock is growing every day, and its challenges are growing more and more every day, and we've got to be in a position to be able to meet those head on.
Well, I'm telling you. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that are the people running for office right now, including the two commissioners that have already they won the Republican primaries. One of the things was that your office had asked for raises for deputies, and instead of giving those raises, or at least to the extent you had asked, they gave themselves large raises. Have the deputies gotten the raises y'all had asked for yet?
Well, we've been in a process, and it's unfortunately taken longer than it should have. We went into, this will be year 6, but roughly 5 years ago, we approached the Commissioner's Court with a plan to do a public safety structured pay chart, basically, to create something that was built on time of service and those types of things. Much more standard in the modern day with how you typically look at handling pay ranges for a law enforcement agency. And that was contingent upon it would get to a point where it would be self-sustaining, but you'd have to fund it to a certain point. The game plan back then was they would take 3 years to do that incrementally. We never did get there. That has not been completed at this point. Again, our one exceptional item, our budgets aren't complete for this cycle yet. But for the most part, I can tell you as the work continues on the in the weeds details of that the one primary exceptional item we will have, going into this budget cycle will be to finish that pay scale out and get it to where it's, like I said, it hits that point of being self-sustaining. And then from that point forward, if the Commissioner's Court elects to do any type of a raise countywide, whether that's cost of living or merit or whatever the case might be, then we can calculate those totals once they've finalized whatever that number is, and then we'll adjust the chart accordingly.
But it all stays within this chart.
But it stays within that, and again, it doesn't have me with 515 total employees with people all over the map in terms of where they're paid at. And again, a lot of the way the historical structure of that stuff has been, it's created these odd ranges. So now we have everybody locked in. Their pay is set based on their time of service at a particular level. And once they hit a certain cap in that entire chart has to move in order for them to see an increase.
But how does it compare with other departments, other sheriff's departments in other counties?
Well, again, one of the big arguments I've made over the years, because that's always a standard thing to do. Well, let's do salary comparisons with Midland, Odessa, Amarillo, and all these. Well, the point I finally started making back, 5+ years ago, almost 6 now, was, look, I'm not losing people to Midland, Odessa, and Amarillo. I'm losing people to Texas Tech, LPD, and Department of Public Safety. That's who I need to, we've got to match up to. That's where we're losing the bulk of our folks to. So again, when you look at Lubbock is an odd-sized county in the sense there's not a lot of comparative counties to look at, and their dynamics are different. So you've got to get to a greater, Bell County area, and that includes 3 large jurisdictions, or a Nueces County and Corpus Christi, to get kind of in the population areas that we're talking about up here. So again, I look at it more from the local level. Again, like I said, if I'm losing people to Midland, Odessa, then I'll look, I'll pay attention to what their pay scales are down there. But the reality, has proven up as we've examined it over a large number of years. Our comparison is very local. In terms of where we sit, of the 4 here locally, the big 4 here locally, I think we're 3rd. I'd have to verify that to be absolutely certain, because it kind of fluctuates. But I think you go. DPS and the police department are typically kind of going back and forth. We usually, like I said, hit in about 3rd, and Texas Tech is, I think we've surpassed Texas Tech, for the moment, but that could change, change in a cycle. So
does that cause a turnover problem?
Absolutely. Again, it's something that people will consider, and look at is certainly pay and benefits and those types of things. And again, from from our perspective, you've got to look at that total package when you're thinking about a career path out there.
Okay.
So
Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe with us this morning, and we're going to take a quick break and come back and have one final segment with the sheriff. News Talk 95.1 FM, 790 AM. We are KFYO Mornings. This is Dave King and Matt Martin on your radio, and this morning with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe in the studio with us. And Sheriff Rowe, we have about 8 minutes left in this segment, and so much still yet to talk about. We've talked about the Lubbock County judge race. I know that there's something that you're pretty excited about is the in-house jail restoration program. Tell us about it.
Well, this is going to be a big boon for Lubbock County and really the surrounding region. To give you just a little bit of background, one of the biggest issues we have facing our county jails in Texas is mental health issues. I mean, we've said it before, we've talked about it. County jails in Texas and across this country become the de facto mental institutions, sadly. And so, when you're dealing with those in the judicial sense, a lot of times we'll throw out numbers like, they tend to take somebody that's got some form of significant mental health issue 4 to 7 times longer to move through the criminal justice system, costing the taxpayers more and more dollars. And we've got a state system that's just strained to its limits. When you look at the state hospital system, there's 2,300 beds for the entire state to use. I was talking to one of our counterparts down in Houston, and at the time I talked to him, which this is dated a few months, 6-7 months ago, he said Harris County, had, let me get this right because I've been throwing out a lot of numbers here, but he had, I think at the time, 465 inmates awaiting a state hospital bed for competency, determination, and possibly restoration with a minimum 6-month wait for the first one to go.
Yeah, and I know that's the biggest county in Texas, but that's just one county.
That's one county. So you can imagine we've got a large population of it. We're rapidly nearing 50% of the population, individuals coming in, being booked in, being identified as having received some level of client services prior to their arrival. So again, when competency becomes a question today, we're like everybody else in the state dependent on the state hospital system to be able to do those processes once a judge orders that competency has to be determined, that they're competent to stand trial. With this, we received a generous grant from the state. Working with StarCare, Beth Lawson and her team, we're able to go back. We had this in place for a brief period of time, and unfortunately, one of the advocacy groups decided they didn't like it, so they threatened to sue us if we didn't, terminate it immediately. So in this particular case, the state has now come in and said, let's look at this, let's pilot these out and see what kind of success. So basically, what will happen is with members of StarCare, our staff, giving them location within the detention center to operate out of. When a judge orders that competency determination and subsequent restoration, to occur, we can do that with staff in the detention center. We don't have to go onto a waiting list to wait for transfer to Vernon, which is typical for us. We can do it, get it done right here as quickly as possible, and there's time frames on how those systems have to work. But we can do it right here where there's no wait, and get them through the rest of the criminal justice process, get a disposition on their case, and get them gone, whatever that may be, whether that's to a home, or to prison, or whatever the case. We can get them adjudicated and out. I'm telling you, for everything we've talked about today, if I was just to dive into some of the details of some of these numbers and the cost that it hits the taxpayer to have these folks sitting out there, while we're going through these processes and waiting.
Well, how long do they wait in jail?
It can be lengthy. It could be, you can suddenly start talking in periods of years.
Wow.
Unfortunately, one kind of test case I could give you happened here a while back, just going through what we call the mental health docket. This one particular individual was rapidly nearing a year of sitting in the jail on an original charge of a DWI. That was the original charge that brought that individual to jail. And it was a year by the time they had determined that, I think it was a she in this particular case, was determined incompetent to stand trial. Well, what do we do? Unfortunately, during her time, from the point of arrest to the point we got her.
And there's no hospital bed for her.
No, there's not. Like I said, there is roughly 2,300 state hospital beds through, I think, 3 or 4 facilities across the state of Texas.
Is this an area that we're just having more mental health issues, or is this something where the state just hasn't kept up with the hospital beds?
I think it's a little bit of both, but one thing is we are far better than we were, say, a decade ago on identifying these individuals. Yeah. So they're not slipping through the cracks. We get them right when they're walking in the door. We can see them systemically.
But the sheriff's department is not, and the jail is not. Does not have the training or the personnel to handle mental health issues with people.
And again, very, very true. We're fortunate in Lubbock because we do have a great partnership with StarCare, our mental health authority here, and they have staff on shift out there at the detention center every day working with these folks. But we're not. We're the exception, not the rule.
So do they keep these people? Do they keep them medicated?
Well, that may be a necessity. It's not true in every case. The thing is to be able to get them functioning to where they can most easily be managed in a general population environment. The problem typically and historically with mental health is because of violence, because of lack of medications, and a whole slew of other things that I know we don't have time to talk about. These folks a lot of times end up in our special housing units behind solid doors and with very minimal movement. because, again, of risk of violence, injury, those types of things. Now we've got them to where they're out. They're working with caseworkers on a daily basis. We have a Star Care employee that works directly in what we refer to as the special needs pod. And I tell you, all you got to do is walk through, take a tour, walk in that pod right there, and I'll challenge either of you to sit there and go, any one of those people do not need to be sitting in a jail. You just look at them, and it's like it's surreal. Because you can just see the fact that these people, because that was the only other option available at the time, that's what happened. And that's why we use that term, and I will say it until I retire. Because of the systemic changes across the country, the move from inpatient mental health care to outpatient mental health care, your question about is the state kept up, that's a question mark. Again, we're 48th or 49th out of 51, including Puerto Rico, in terms of per capita mental health funding. So again, that's why the jails have become what they are, because there's not the inpatient, mental health capacity that there used to be. I tell people this all the time. Keep this in mind. 1955, there were 755,000 inpatient mental health beds across the country. They make there's decisions made at the highest levels to say, let's move from inpatient to outpatient. Probably very, very smart if the funding supports the outpatient care. It's the better way to approach it. Fast forward to 1995, the inpatient mental health beds across the state's been reduced to 55,000. So take that into consideration along with the population growth that happened during that same 40-year period. Like I said, and so, where we're fortunate in Lubbock and we can do things like this, and we've got the size and the capacity and the numbers to generate it, you've got to think about the fact of the 246 other counties, most of which are rural and frontier across the state of Texas, less than 100-bed facilities. And that's the vast majority of jails in Texas. And so, again, when we're down talking to the legislature, those are the ones we're working for, because they're the ones that they may not get one very often, but when they do, what do you do with them? In our area, they can bring them to us. We can at least handle them for them because we've got the capabilities. But
so do you work with the counties in this area about that, with that as well?
We are out of time. That about wraps it up for a Tuesday here. Sheriff, we could just go on talking for another hour.
Anytime I'm available to you on a phone call.
We're going to have you out more often. But that about wraps up a Tuesday edition of Dave King and Matt Martin in the morning here on KFYO. And we've been visiting with Lubbock County Sheriff Kelly Rowe, and we've talked about and covered a lot of ground this morning, and still have more to talk about. But we thank you for listening. We hope that you'll join us again in the morning about 6:20 or so, and we're going to do it all over again. Have a great day, everyone.